Hey guys, and welcome to Politics Snaps. Now you're about to watch an interview I did with Chloe Westley, the Brexit campaigner. Now I slightly screwed up the settings on the camera, and when I say slightly I mean I completely screwed them up, so the quality is terrible. The audio quality is fine though, so perhaps just think of this as more of a radio segment or a podcast with some kind of very blurry footage in the background. Thanks, and I hope you can still sort of enjoy. So yeah, I'm delighted to be joined by Chloe Westley, who is the campaign manager of the Taxpayers Alliance, also a very prominent pro-Brexit campaigner who used to work for Vote Leave, so that was the official Brexit campaign during the referendum. So Chloe, obviously we were meant to leave the EU in March, it's now May and we're still a member of the EU. How does that make you feel?
Really angry, really angry. Not just for me, but for all of the people that trusted this government to take Britain out of the EU by the 29th of March. I don't think the whole country were following all of the debates, all of the votes throughout this process, but they did know that we were supposed to leave on the 29th of March, and the Prime Minister said over and over again that no deal would be better than a bad deal. Yeah. Then MPs decided and voted that this was a bad deal, so we should have come out of the EU with no deal. And I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't feel like I can trust the government now to implement anything they said they're going to implement. It's a huge betrayal of the British public, and it's simply unacceptable.
I mean, do you think there are people in government who are actively trying to frustrate the Brexit process?
That's a really good question. I hope not. I really hope not. I'd like to think that every politician meant what they said when they said they would respect the result. But sadly, I worry that is the case. I do worry that there are certain politicians and ministers who really don't want Brexit to happen, or who are really pushing for a very close relationship with the EU, which is not what people voted for. One of the biggest concerns I have is the lack of planning for no deal, the lack of a drive to plan for no deal. I'm not sure actually the government ever intended on leaving with no deal, given the way that the Chancellor didn't really make a big deal about the money being spent to prepare and what they were doing to prepare. I mean, imagine if we had a Chancellor and a Prime Minister who were publicly announcing and declaring their plans for a no deal and then walking into the negotiations. It would have been a much stronger hand. But the EU could see that this government wasn't taking the no deal scenario seriously, so they were prepared to accept any kind of deal. That's not a way to conduct a negotiation.
Obviously you're quite a prominent young Brexiteer. I mean, how have you found the reaction to you as a young Brexiteer? And obviously most young people are kind of seen as being pro-Remain.
Well, actually, if you break it down by class, about half of young working class voters voted Leave. But of course, overall, it's about 70% of young people that voted Remain or something. That is a majority, but it's not the whole truth. And not every young person did vote to Remain. I know a lot of young people, a lot of friends that I have that are scared to say it, but really quite optimistic about Brexit, especially because a lot of the friends I have are more international, more in line with the Commonwealth and perhaps the European Union, and actually quite excited about that. So it has been an interesting reaction. What I have noticed is, and this goes for anyone, regardless of background, anyone who goes out there and publicly says, we should respect the result, is instantly vilified. If you go on Twitter or on a program or on the radio, or even sometimes just telling your colleagues that you think the government should respect the result, it's instant vilification. Racist, Little Englander, some bizarrely misogynist. I have no idea what that has to do with democracy, but all of these labels, and it's really quite shocking. And I've been watching from Westminster the way in which a lot of the kind of Remain supporting media presenters and commentators have just completely tried to vilify lots of people in this country that don't have a voice. If you brand 17.4 million people as bigots or racists on your radio program, for example, that might make you feel good as a Remainer. But actually you're picking on people that have no right of reply. And that's something that really annoys me, is the bullying of people in this country who are good people, who are sitting there watching from their homes thinking, I just want to live in this democratic country. And all of these people are calling me awful things and trying to vilify me. I mean, it's awful. It's really, really awful. And I feel really, really sorry for anyone who does go through the vilification process by admitting to having voted leave, or by simply stating that you believe in democracy, that the vote should be implemented.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there are some Brexiteers, I mean particularly young Brexiteers, who might have been silenced by kind of online bullying, who would like to speak out but feel that they either can't because they'll be targeted or they have been targeted, and that puts them off?
Absolutely. That's why a lot of the bullying happens, because it's actually a very smart strategy. If you try to tear down or break down anyone who stands up and says that I believe in this country and I want independence, if you vilify them and bully them, it will make others afraid to do the same. And I'm concerned that there might be some people that see a lot of the abuse directed at people like myself and Darren Grimes and think, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. And I understand that, because it's not a nice thing to happen to anyone. And so I don't think it's cowardly to protect yourself from that. It's a really difficult fight. Some of us have the ability to fight it because we are working in politics, but others have jobs where if they admitted to voting leave, they would have a really tough time at work or at school or at university. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, how worried are you about the state of British democracy as a result of, the current EU situation?
I'm really worried. I'm worried that it's going to be difficult for the trust to be restored in the system if Brexit doesn't happen. The trust has already been broken by the government not taking Britain out of the EU by the date they said that Britain would leave the EU. I think that's done irreparable damage, and it's going to take a lot of effort to rebuild that trust with voters in this country. But when I was learning about Britain at school and reading about Britain, I was in awe of the history and the Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution and everything that happened. And I thought, wow, this is the mother of all parliaments in London, that the Australian Parliament and so many others are based on. And I had such a respect, and that is really what made me really want to come to this country. I thought it was very special, and as well because of my family being here. And to see that part of Britain being disrespected and potentially ruined forever is just, I can't even put into words. And I just don't think that the people that are destroying it know that they are, or appreciate what they're doing. I mean, if you are anti-Brexit and you don't want Brexit to happen, yes, it might feel good in the short term to approve of the betrayal of this referendum, to egg on MPs to stop Brexit, but you're giving politicians the precedent to do that. I mean, what happens when there's an election or a referendum on something that you care about, and you're in the majority? You will have given the precedent for MPs to ignore that in the future. It's not just about this one referendum, it's about whether or not MPs do have to act on promises at an election and during referendums. I think they should have to act on those promises.
I mean, do you think there's a danger of some people turning to political extremes, or perhaps even turning against the system itself?
Absolutely. I think that's happening in Europe, because the only political parties in Europe that are addressing Euroscepticism and concerns about immigration tend to be the more extreme parties. And if the only political parties addressing the key concerns of voters also holds very extreme views on other subjects, that's a bit of a concern. And I don't think the solution to that is more Europe. This seems to be the EU solution to everything is, well, we must have, more Europe. I mean, that's not going to solve anything. Actually responding to voters' concerns and giving back more control to democratically elected national governments, that would see a drop in populism. So I do worry that could happen in the UK.
So obviously at the moment the government is negotiating with Labour about potentially what sounds like a customs union. Obviously they would call it a customs union, but something like a customs union. I mean, if that's the outcome, do you think it would actually honour the referendum result?
Staying in the customs union doesn't honour the referendum result at all. One of the key opportunities of leaving the EU is negotiating trade agreements with non-EU countries that the EU has struggled to negotiate with. I mean, the markets in Asia are booming. The fastest growing economies in the world, I believe, are actually in Africa. And a lot of these countries, don't have agreements with the EU, and it would take a decade to sign an agreement with the EU. Then an agreement with the UK would be very easy to sign because it's one country instead of 28 different countries. And especially at a time when, if you look at what's happening in the world, the growth, the innovation, it's not happening in Europe. It's actually happening in other countries, in America and Asia. These are the really exciting parts of the world that Britain should be doing business with and exporting to and buying from. So to lose out on that opportunity, I think would be a huge mistake. And one of the big concerns with the Prime Minister's deal, May's agreement, was that it would potentially tie the UK in the customs union without a say on those trade agreements. So having the EU write trade agreements that apply to the UK without any British representation, I mean, that's an extraordinarily bad thing for British business. And so it was a really bad deal, and so we should have left with no deal.
Just one final question. So obviously at the moment the British right, the British Conservative movement is badly split over Brexit between the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party. Do you think there's a potential for, if there's a general election, that split could result in Labour coming through the middle and forming a government? And how much would that worry you?
I think the Brexit Party would take a lot of votes from Labour, actually. I really do think that. I think the Conservative Party have made a lot of mistakes, but are seen as, and have definitely behaved as, more pro-Brexit than Labour.
Yeah.
I think Labour should be worried about the Brexit Party, actually. I think they could lose a lot of their seats up in the north of the country, because they did essentially mislead voters at the last election. Their manifesto committed to essentially a hard Brexit, but I think with customs union membership. They didn't say they'd have a second referendum. They didn't say they'd push for a really soft Remain option. So I do think the Brexit Party could potentially take away more seats from Labour. But who knows? I mean, we're in really uncharted territory right now. I don't care really the rosette or the colour or the name of the next party of government. I care about the policies. And I think the next people that are elected into our British Parliament should be pro-democracy, pro-Brexit, pro-Britain, and pro-business. And I think any party that can bring together those things would have huge success with the electorate.